Okay, so let's unpack this feeling that I think so many of us hit at some point. You're grinding hard, you're constantly learning, hitting your macros, doing the optimized morning routine, and yet there is this pervasive low-grade bad mood.
Right, yeah.
You just feel incredibly numb or stuck or just bone tired despite doing quote-unquote everything right. And we usually assume we're fundamentally broken when this happens, but actually it's often our environment quietly pushing us into a state of nihilism.
Yeah, that assumption that we are broken is so damaging. We immediately try to debug our character, like we think we need more discipline or a better mindset. But when you feel persistently hollow for months on end, auditing your character it's the wrong move. You really have to audit your environment.
Which sounds a bit counterintuitive when you're used to blaming yourself.
It does, but there are specific structural factors that create this emotional flatline. And the most common one right now is actually the physical isolation tied to remote work.
See, I have to push back on that a little bit because remote work is constantly hailed as this ultimate life hack. You skip the commute, you control your environment, you can do laundry during a meeting. How is that causing a low-grade bad mood? It seems like it should solve burnout.
Well, the flexibility is undeniably great,
Yeah.
but it removes the natural friction of human proximity. I think we often underestimate our biological wiring. Humans need physical presence in a way that staring at a grid of faces on a screen simply cannot replace.
So video calls just don't count.
Not really, no. A video call drains your energy because it feels like an administrative task. It lacks the micro-expressions, the shared space, the casual hallway banter that actually regulates our nervous systems. Even if you consider yourself a huge introvert, going weeks without meaningful in-person contact makes that creating numbness start to feel totally normal.
So you're saying that even the mild annoyance of being around a bustling office actually serves a biological purpose?
Exactly. It grounds you in reality. When you only interact with floating heads, you lose a fundamental tether to the world. And that isolation gets compounded incredibly fast when you pair it with a disconnected job.
A disconnected job meaning what exactly?
It's not the stereotypical toxic workplace with a screaming boss. It's much quieter than that. It's spending 8 hours a day on work that is just fine. The pay is decent, but it doesn't touch your core values or spark your curiosity in any meaningful way.
But isn't a job just a job for most people? I mean, we're often told to just clock in, get paid, and find meaning elsewhere. Why does a fine job cause an emotional flatline?
Because of a process called contamination. You spend a massive portion of your waking life doing this work. Over time, you start treating your entire life with the same low-stakes indifference you bring to a boring Monday morning status update.
Wow, contamination's perfectly descriptive.
Yeah, the apathy bleeds out. It manifests as this consistent Sunday dread that you can't quite pinpoint. You begin to feel like a resource being managed rather than a person being invested in. If your job does nothing for you besides paying the bills, that emotional flatness inevitably spreads to your evenings and weekends.
It's like a dye washing over everything else. But if you have to pay the bills and your job is just fine, how do you stop that dye from coloring the rest of your life?
This is where personal goals outside of work become critical. If you do not have a project, a skill, or some pursuit you are building strictly for yourself, you become entirely dependent on your job to provide your life with meaning. Jobs are simply not built to carry that kind of weight.
That makes a lot of sense. So a side project isn't just something cute to do if you happen to have extra free time.
Far from it. Side quests are load-bearing infrastructure for anyone wanting to maintain their sanity. Having a different center of gravity outside of work means you can easily tolerate a gray job or a week with low social interaction. You have momentum somewhere else. Without that external momentum, you slip into NPC mode.
Just a non-playable character in your own life.
Exactly, just going through the motions and waiting for life to happen to you.
Okay, but let's look at how these things interact. I imagine plenty of people have a remote job but also have hobbies, or maybe a disconnected job, but a highly active social life.
That is the compounding danger. If you have a remote job but love the work and have a side project, you handle the physical isolation. If your job is completely disconnected from your values, but your social life is vibrant, you stay grounded. The massive void opens up when you stack all three: physical isolation, a disconnected job, and zero personal goals.
You just have nothing left in the tank.
Right? Ordinary motivation cannot fill that void because you have nowhere to draw energy from. It doesn't arrive as a dramatic crisis. It creeps in as a slow, quiet conclusion that nothing really matters simply because your environment has been proving that thesis to you every single day for months.
It's terrifying to realize your environment is draining you that thoroughly. But there's something fascinating about what happens when you're actually sitting in that void. Picture this, you're on your couch, you haven't left the house in days, you feel restless, maybe a bit irritable, and you're just about to reach for your phone to kill the feeling.
Which we all do instantly.
Constantly. Most of us think that restlessness is apathy. We think we're just dead inside. But that's actually a massive misread of the situation, isn't it?
It's a total misread. Apathy is a flatline. Apathy wants absolutely nothing. Boredom, on the other hand, has an edge to it. Boredom is proof that your desire is still awake and running underneath the surface, desperately looking for a place to go. Reframing boredom as a vital signal rather than a symptom of depression changes everything.
So if I'm feeling that itchy, annoyed kind of boredom, that is actually a positive sign.
Especially if you're coming out of a rough patch, like a period of intense burnout or a personal loss. During the deepest parts of that low, you genuinely experience the flat line of apathy. But when you suddenly start feeling restless and annoyed that there's nothing good to watch or nothing to do, people often panic.
Because they mistake that restlessness for a relapse.
Yes, they think something is still horribly wrong. In reality, it's your nervous system finally coming back online. It's the very definition of recovery.
That completely flips the script. The restlessness means you care enough to be dissatisfied again. But what happens when you aren't burned out, but you just deliberately try to slow your life down? Say you take a break from listening to stuff on your commute or step back from social media.
The first few days of cutting the noise usually feel quite peaceful. But shortly after, that itchy, generative kind of boredom kicks in. And this is crucial when you embrace silence. Generative pressure builds.
Generative pressure.
Your subconscious has been working away in the background this whole time, and it finally has the space to be heard. Ideas start bubbling up. You start thinking about conversations you've avoided or projects you actually want to tackle. This is why people get their best ideas in the shower or on long, quiet drives. The human brain does not generate ideas when it is actively consuming information. It generates in the gaps.
We are so fiercely conditioned to hate those gaps, though. Think about standing in line for coffee or walking 2 blocks to the store. The phone instantly comes out. The gap never even gets a chance to open.
That automatic filling of the gaps is an active prevention of self-knowledge. When you immediately reach for distraction, the second you feel a hint of understimulation, you train yourself to never hear the signal your boredom is trying to send. You never figure out what you actually want or what you are so terrified of facing.
So how do we break that reflex? Because telling someone just put your phone away usually doesn't work. It just makes them anxious.
You have to treat it as an information gathering exercise, not a meditation. Try sitting somewhere without your phone, completely unsimulated for 20 minutes. Notice what surfaces in your mind. Notice what starts to feel physically uncomfortable. That discomfort is just your boredom being totally honest with you.
Just 20 minutes of sitting.
Yes, it forces you to ask a fundamental question about your current state. Did you actually finish what you needed to do, or did you just stop?
Did you actually finish or did you just stop? That's brilliant. And speaking of stopping, here's where it gets really interesting. There is a massive trap that highly ambitious people fall into when trying to avoid those quiet, uncomfortable moments. We generally assume that if we are working hard, sweating, and pushing ourselves, we are inevitably making progress.
We absolutely assume that.
But doing hard things is not the same as doing the right things.
This is perhaps the most insidious trap of all. There's a specific kind of avoidance that hides entirely behind difficulty. Because the task demands sacrifice and effort, it feels exactly like progress.
Yeah.
But it quietly keeps you away from the ambiguous, messy work that would actually change your life.
How do we tell the difference? Because if I'm exhausting myself every day, I certainly feel like I'm moving forward.
The most telling diagnostic question you can ask yourself is, what changes if I succeed at this? If the answer is vague, purely emotional, or doesn't align with your actual life goals, you are likely stuck in an avoidance trap. Think about 2 different people going to the gym. One person goes for 45 minutes 3 times a week because they need the baseline energy and mental focus to build their startup. The gym serves a clear purpose. It unlocks the next step of their real goal.
Right. The gym is the supporting habit. What's the contrast?
The contrast is a person who spends 90 minutes every single morning obsessively training for a regional powerlifting competition that isn't anywhere on their actual life roadmap. The effort is incredibly real. The gym is undeniably hard. But it's just a place where progress is measurable and unambiguous. You add 5 pounds to the bar and you succeeded today. It's a substitute for the real work they're avoiding, which is likely highly ambiguous and lacks a clear leaderboard.
So the difficulty is impressive, but it's not actually load-bearing for their future.
Precisely. A great example is someone spending 2 solid years studying vocabulary and grammar to become highly conversational in Portuguese. It takes massive discipline. But their actual business plan requires them to close deals with English-speaking clients in the next 6 months.
Right.
The Portuguese is a genuine difficult skill, but right now, it's entirely decorative. It doesn't carry the weight their current plan requires to succeed.
I can see how easy it is to trick ourselves with that. You can point to the language app streak and say, look how productive I am, while your business slowly runs out of cash. This happens in the workplace all the time, too. You can feel incredibly productive, completely drained by 5 p.m., but your primary project hasn't advanced an inch.
That is pseudo-work. It's what happens when you accumulate fatigue on measurable, immediate tasks. You spend the whole day optimizing your project management software, color-coding your calendar, or achieving inbox zero. It mimics the feeling of deep work because you are expending mental energy. But the ambiguous high-stakes work, the project you actually care about, stalls out. Our brains naturally want to redirect effort toward where results are highly legible and immediate.
I want to bring up something that might be controversial. Our culture absolutely idolizes suffering as a proxy for success. I'm thinking about the David Goggins model. We consume hours of motivational content telling us that suffering builds character. We're told to wake up at 4 a.m., jump into a freezing cold plunge, run 10 miles before the sun comes up. Isn't that raw discipline the ultimate key to success?
Raw discipline is a tool, not a destination. If it lacks direction, it becomes a trap. Waking up at 4 a.m. is hard. Immersing yourself in freezing water is hard.
Yeah.
But a person can do that for 500 days in a row, build a calloused mind, complete brutal physical training, and still entirely avoid the one hard conversation with their partner or the one imperfect first draft of a novel that would actually change their trajectory.
Oh, wow. So the physical suffering just becomes a shield.
Exactly. Difficulty without direction is just discomfort. You use the fact that you suffered in the gym as an alibi to avoid the ambiguous, unmeasurable work that actually matters. The gym cannot substitute for the vulnerability of trying something where you might actually fail publicly.
That's a tough pill to swallow. The most important hard thing often has no leaderboard, no medals, and no immediate feedback. It's just a messy, uncertain attempt. And speaking of messy attempts, let's look at another way we avoid the real work. The endless research phase. The trap of learning versus doing.
A very common one.
I know I'm deeply guilty of this. Imagine spending 3 weeks researching how to start a YouTube channel. You compare different camera bodies, you master the intricacies of the algorithm, you study thumbnail click-through rates, you end up knowing more about the platform than people who are actually posting videos, but you have 0 published videos yourself. It feels like progress, but it's completely adjacent.
Adjacent progress is the most dangerous kind of procrastination because it provides you with a completely clean conscience. You aren't binging television, you're studying, you're taking notes. But the thing you want to build still doesn't exist. This happens constantly when people accumulate theory without ever putting it into practice. You can eloquently explain complex business frameworks at a dinner party, but you haven't shipped a single product.
Yeah.
Knowledge that hasn't met reality isn't preparation. It's just accumulation.
It's like a surgeon who has read every textbook in the library but has never actually held a scalpel. You wouldn't want them operating on you. The gap between knowing and doing only closes from the doing side.
And because people are terrified of that doing side, they start preemptively answering questions they haven't even encountered yet. They study advanced cybersecurity vulnerabilities before they've even coded a basic login page. Or they read extensive books on corporate contract law before they have secured a single freelance client.
That is so incredibly relatable. You're researching problems that will likely never apply to you, just to feel prepared. And the moment you finally feel like you have enough information to start, the brain steps in and says, wait, I should probably just read one more book. Let me just take one more online course to make sure I do this properly.
That one more resource instinct is nothing but your brain negotiating with the discomfort of uncertainty. Learning feels safe, cozy, and entirely within your control. Starting feels exposed and messy. So you move the goalposts. You set a benchmark for when you will finally be ready to launch. You hit that benchmark, and instantly you raise the standard. You tell yourself, well, first I needed the basics, but now I really need to master these advanced best practices before I can go public.
It's an unconscious design to keep yourself in the safe study phase forever.
It is. And the simplest way to diagnose this in yourself is to check your comfort level. If you feel highly productive, but you do not feel uncomfortable, you are likely stuck in a study loop. Doing the actual work involves the friction of reality. It involves the very real possibility of failure and the judgment of other people. It's inherently uncomfortable. Studying is engaging and energizing, but it's ultimately safe.
Safe, right.
You have to ask yourself, are you actually solving the right problem, or are you just protecting yourself with a clean alibi? Thoroughness has massive diminishing returns. At a certain point, the only way to get new information is to make the actual attempt.
You already have enough information to start. That's the hard truth we all need to hear. But let's follow this timeline. Let's say you do start. You push through the discomfort, you abandon the safe study phase, you endure the messy attempts, and you finally achieve that massive goal. You get the big promotion you spent 3 years chasing. You ran on pure, stubborn willpower to get there. What happens next? Because there's a fascinating paradox about the very fuel that drives early success.
This is where we encounter the ego's sabotage of success. The fuel that gets you off the ground is often what we might call dark energy. It's the desire to prove the doubters wrong, the drive to outrun past failures, or just pure, unadulterated ego. In the early stages of a career or a solo project, that dark energy is an incredibly powerful engine. It works, but it's strictly calibrated for simple, singular goals. When you actually achieve success and your responsibilities grow in complexity, especially when you start leading others, that exact same fuel becomes highly toxic.
Why does it become toxic? If it worked to get you there, why wouldn't it work to keep you there?
Because your ego starts optimizing for your personal narrative, rather than the actual outcome. When you are a scrappy solo operator, backing yourself aggressively and moving fast works. But as a leader, being right and getting the right outcome begin to diverge drastically. You see this when someone wins the argument but loses the result. Imagine you're in a meeting and you overrule a team member, forcing your specific idea through. You feel a massive wave of relief because you won the debate. You proved you were the smartest person in the room.
Even if the final product ends up being objectively worse because of it.
Exactly. That relief you feel after dominating the conversation is just your ego in charge. The ego filters the world for your story, not for what actually works. Another consequence of running on dark energy is that your motivation becomes entirely dependent on opposition. Dark energy burns very hot, but it absolutely requires an enemy to function.
So when you finally succeed, and the enemy is defeated, or the doubters are silenced, what happens?
The enemy disappears, and suddenly you feel completely empty and directionless. The drive vanishes. To get it back, you have to start manufacturing new, unnecessary conflicts just to feel that spark again. You pick fights with rival departments or invent slights from competitors. Motivation built strictly on opposition has no stable long-term structure. It will eventually burn down everything you've built just to keep the furnace hot.
It sounds exhausting just thinking about living like that, constantly hunting for dragons to slay just to get out of bed. And it inevitably clouds your judgment, right? You start optimizing your decisions for how they will sound to others, rather than what they will actually do.
That's the subtlest trap. Imagine choosing between two product directions. One is a bold, highly visible, aggressive bet that sounds amazing on a resume or in a keynote speech. The other option is quieter, uncertain, but deeply aligned with what your team's data actually shows the customers need. The ego reliably drifts toward the bold, highly visible option. It narrows your input signal to whatever concerns the heroic narrative you're trying to tell about yourself.
So how do we get out of this ego trap? If dark energy got us to the top of the mountain, but it's going to push us off the other side, what's the alternative operating system?
The alternative is shifting to a service orientation. And it's important to clarify that this isn't some grand moral awakening. It's not about becoming a totally selfless martyr.
Yeah.
It's a highly practical, necessary upgrade to your operating system to handle complexity. You have to stop filtering your decisions through the lens of how does this make me look, and start filtering them through, does this actually help the people I am responsible for?
That's a huge shift in perspective. It takes the spotlight entirely off your own neuroses.
Ego is fantastic scaffolding when you are building a structure of one. It holds you up when things get hard. But to scale a project to a team of 10 or 1,000, you have to tear that scaffolding down. The structure has to stand on its own merits, not on your personal need for validation. Dark energy gets you started, but clarity about exactly who you are serving is the only sustainable fuel that keeps you going over the long horizon.
Okay, so we've journeyed all the way from the crushing numbness of an isolating environment, through the discomfort of raw boredom, past the traps of fake productivity and endless research, to the final realization that our own ego might be the final boss we have to defeat. We've talked extensively about how these traps, the adjacent progress, the dark energy, the fake suffering, are all incredibly intoxicating because they provide us with a clean conscience and a clear enemy. They protect us from the messy reality of truly starting.
They are perfectly designed shields, and recognizing them is the first step. But breaking the pattern requires a radical shift in action. If these elaborate preparations and defensive postures are just ways to protect our egos from the sting of potential failure, we have to ask ourselves what it would look like to strip all of that away.
Just completely tear down the scaffolding.
Exactly. What would happen if you dedicated just 1 week to doing absolutely zero prep, zero research, and zero optimizing? What if you forced yourself to face the raw, unpolished, embarrassing first step of your biggest goal, with absolutely no scaffolding to protect your ego?